Today is Tuesday, April 7, 2020. Coming up on Roland Martin Unfiltered, Black Enterprise founder Earl Graves Sr. has died. In our second hour, we'll honor him with a tribute. We'll talk with the president of Morgan State University, where he graduated from. We'll also talk with Linda Johnson Rice, the daughter of John H. Johnson, the founder of Ebony and Jet. He was very good friends with Earl Graves. We'll also talk to Bob Brown, who worked in the Nixon administration, the man who made sure that Earl Graves got the loan to start Black Enterprise. You don't want to miss our tribute to one of our titans of industry. Also, we'll talk about in the first hour, coronavirus, its impact all across the country, how it's impacting African Americans in a huge way. We'll be joined by Congresswoman Karen Bass, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. Also, parents are finding out that homeschooling is no joke. Former Teacher of the Year, who now is a Congresswoman, Johanna Hayes, will also join us. In Wisconsin, the shameful Republicans forcing people to actually go out and vote. They fought everything to keep that from happening. We'll talk with Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin, as well as a journalist who breaks down why the Supreme Court and Republican state Supreme Courts are more likely to allow voter suppression moving forward. Also, all this conspiracy about 5G, we're going to set the truth and give you the truth right here. Plus, how can small Black-owned businesses get access to federal grants? We'll talk with Ron Busby of U.S. Black Chambers, Inc. Folks, we got a packed show. It is time to bring the funk on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the miss, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time. And it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, y'all. It's Roland Martin, rolling with Roland now. He's funk, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now.
Folks, as of today, there are 391,632 cases of COVID-19 in the United States and 3 U.S. territories. 12,558 patients with the virus have died. That's nearly double yesterday's number. That's 2,863 more people than this time yesterday. 21,561 patients have recovered from the virus. In his briefing today, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo showed where most of the cases are.
New York is still the most heavily impacted state in the nation. New Jersey, which is on the curve a little bit behind New York, is suffering. And again, our thoughts and prayers are with them. I spoke to Governor Murphy of New Jersey today, and we talked through the situation and working on joint strategies. But our heart goes out to all of our neighbors in New Jersey, Michigan, California, Louisiana. In terms of how we're operating, how we're managing the situation, as we know, the hospital system basically is a three-legged stool. It relies on number of beds, number of staff, and the equipment. Number of beds, we have started with a system of about 53,000 beds statewide. We're up to about 90,000 available beds, so we have more than enough beds available.
A disproportionate number of those infections and deaths are African Americans. Joining me right now is Congresswoman Karen Bass of California, who is the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. Congresswoman, glad to have you back on Roland Martin Unfiltered. We see what's happening in Louisiana, where the number of deaths have increased. We look at what is happening in Michigan as well. We're hearing out of Chicago, Georgia, Mississippi. The reality is Black people are being greatly impacted by coronavirus. What is going to be done specifically to target this community, because the numbers are dire?
Absolutely. And I don't think that we should be shocked by that, because if you take any health issue, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and you look at the health status of white people compared to Black folks, All you have to do is double the numbers in terms of we get twice as many Black folks with diabetes, hypertension, lung disease, et cetera. And so that makes us at greater risk for COVID. Now, in my opinion, what needs to be done now, given that we see these numbers, there needs to be focused, concentrated testing in areas where the population is more at risk. And then the test needs to be turned around very quickly. So what I have learned recently is that there are doctors around the country who want to get access to machines that will allow them to rapidly process the tests, but the federal government, the administration, will not allow them to have access to the machines. The machines are costly. Some doctors I have spoken with have told me they have the money for the machines, but they're not being released. And so our people need to be treated aggressively. It needs to be diagnosed quickly. What I am worried about is that our people are being sent home, told to isolate themselves, and then when they get really, really sick, they go to the emergency room, and by that time, it's too late. Roland, I worked in the emergency room in Los Angeles, one of the largest emergency rooms in the country at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. And so this is really deja vu to me, very similar situations. And so knowing what happened then and knowing what happens to us generally when we encounter the medical field, there has to be specific focused attention. You can't do everything addressing the population as a whole. If you have 3 times the amount of deaths in one population, then obviously that population needs targeted attention.
Well, one of the things that, Anthony, go to my iPad, please. The Hill has this story. States battle each other for equipment in supply chain crunch. And this is part of the problem. What Donald Trump has created a situation where you have states competing against one another. The federal government has not done what they were supposed to do. And so this turns into just a big old, great thing for big business to make more money.
Well, you know, the thing that's so ironic about it is that he flirts with being an authoritarian. And here is where authoritarian leadership is needed, in the sense that he should take control of the national supply and it should be allocated based on need. What he has done that you have described is that he has turned this into a free market situation. So not only do you have states bidding against each other, you have the federal government coming in and underbidding states and taking the equipment. This is one of the most insane things that has probably happened in U.S. history, where the president, who wants to be an authoritarian, abdicates responsibility and turns the U.S. population over to the market. So we're all part of the marketplace. And depending on your state, such as a state like Georgia, where you have mayors that are trying to do the right thing and follow the public health protocols, and you have a governor that comes in and says, no, I'm going to override what a city wants to do. But, you know, you also have a TV station, Trump's TV station, that is putting out absolute misinformation. I was watching the other night on some of the famous programs that the president likes, and they were saying, well, we have a cure for this. It's really not that bad. You can go buy this or get a doctor to prescribe you this medication. They put on people that supposedly were cured by this medication, presenting this false hope. So you have people, and when they've done polling, you see that Republicans and Democrats poll differently as to how serious they think this is. The saddest thing in the world is that he set up the governors that are basically his devotees. When the virus comes to them, guess who's going to be hurt? Because guess where those governors are? Those governors are in the South, where our people are.
Well, and one of the things that we're now finding out, that the drug that he keeps touting, we now know that he has an equity stake or an investment in the company that makes this. You would think you might want to disclose that. I mean, so now we see all of a sudden why Donald Trump has been touting this drug, because he can benefit financially.
Well, you know, I mean, it's the same way that when we passed the $500 billion $500 billion for businesses, he didn't want any oversight at all. As a matter of fact, when the issue of congressional oversight was raised, He said, that's not needed. I can provide the oversight. I mean, it just gets more and more absurd every day. But the problem is now, I mean, we've put up with his madness for the last 3 years, but now his madness is killing people. And the idea that the United States would be so far behind the rest of the world, this is a shameful moment in our history.
Congresswoman Karen Bass, last question for you. I am hearing from a number of African-American business owners who have talked about the difficulties to be able to access these loans. I saw one story where, in fact, this was a Trump supporter. I saw a tweet. This person was it was almost the 18,000 person on the phone line. Difficult getting through. I also talked to another small business owner who said that these major businesses are the ones lining up. And now what they've also done is the way they've now qualified a lot of these major companies that have more than 500 employees, they're now designating if you have individual restaurants. And so they're sort of applying that way. And then the last point, the banks are really helping the largest customers. And so really the small businesses are getting screwed. What's going to happen here? Because that's the lifeblood of America, these small businesses.
Well, and not only that, I mean, it's the lifeblood, in our communities, too. Well, if this crisis were to end in a month, my concern is that a lot of jobs where people are laid off, the businesses won't exist anymore. I mean, we're still trying to recover from the 2008 recession when we lost so much of our home ownership. And now to have this happen, so you're talking about small businesses, you're also talking about our churches who are not eligible for the small business loans unless they have a nonprofit. So I will tell you, though, Roland, that when you have a crisis like this, you have to pass legislation immediately. You have to run and you have to put a finger in that dam because it's about to break. But once you do that, then you need to see, well, what are the consequences of the legislation you passed? Did it help anybody? So now that we see problems, we can go back. I do believe that we'll have another bill by the end of the year. We know that everybody is having problems with this. And so I'm hoping that in the next legislative effort that we'll be able to do this. But like I said a few minutes ago, I am worried that the length of time it takes to do these things, that our small businesses won't be able to survive in the interim. So I'm deeply concerned about that.
All right, then. Congresswoman Karen Bass, we really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, folks, right now, the White House is holding their news conference. Donald Trump is speaking, which means we're not going to be going live to that news conference. I told you, anytime Donald Trump is at the microphone, we're not going to carry it live. He lies absolutely too much to the American people. It would be a shame to carry that message. And so that is simply something that we are not going to do. It's just simply not going to happen. And so if Dr. Fauci or Dr. Burke steps to the microphone, we'll certainly take their comments, but we're not going to take anything that comes from Donald Trump. Now, folks, one of the things we keep talking about is, again, the impact on this whole issue among African Americans. And in fact, the folks at the Root, Michael Harriot, he sent me this tweet as I was coming into work. They've done a particular piece on this. And it is quite interesting when you look at this piece, because it lays out exactly where the hot spots are in terms of what's going on. And what's really interesting is that so many of these places where African Americans are, over the weekend, we have really been focusing on this. We've been looking at what's happening, again, in Louisiana, specifically New Orleans, what's been happening in Albany, Georgia as well, all of these different places. And it has been quite shameful, frankly, to look at this reaction that's been going on as we've been trying to deal with it. It's just crazy. So let me go ahead and read. So 8 of the 10. So this is the headline. 8 of the 10 worst coronavirus hotspots are in the South. I'm going to pull up. Let me pull up on my iPad because I'm reading the story right now on my phones. I want to show you guys this again. This was sent to me just a little bit ago by Michael Harriot of the Root, and for you to begin to understand its impact. and that is these places. Detroit, top 10 population adjusted hotspots in the corresponding counties. And so what they list here is Detroit as one of those places, Atlanta, Albany, Georgia, South Carolina, Nashville, Tennessee, Mississippi, New Orleans, Little Rock, Arkansas, Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and then in Colorado. And so we need to understand exactly how we are being impacted in a huge, huge way by this whole deal. And so, unfortunately, too many of our folks are also dying from this. So we're going to get into this a little bit later. But first, I need to deal with what's happening in our schools. Now, schools have been out. States have said that the schools are not going to be coming back for the rest of the year. That means parents are the ones who are now having to be the teachers. And one of the things that we now are also realizing that many of us have known, but now the rest of the country is finding out, is what happens when you when you don't have the resources, when you have kids who don't have access to online tools, when you don't have Wi-Fi. Joining us right now is a former Teacher of the Year, now Congresswoman Jahana Hayes of Connecticut. 2016, she was named National Teacher of the Year. Congresswoman, glad to have you in Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Hi, Roland. Great to be here.
First thing is that South Carolina converted some 3,000 buses for mobile Wi-Fi. I was talking to a school board member in Montgomery County, Alabama last week, who was talking about the problems they're facing there. In Dallas, the superintendent said 40% of the students don't have access to the internet. People have this assumption that all schools are equal when, in fact, they are not. And this coronavirus pandemic is exposing exactly what the problems are when it comes to unequal education in America.
Yes, Roland, you're absolutely right. And on that issue specifically, it was why I and so many of my colleagues fought for in any infrastructure package that we talked about rural broadband, that we talked about bringing internet to some of these communities. This is something that, like you said, reveals the cracks of a much larger issue, because before we had a pandemic, we had students who were required to submit assignments online or to respond to things using electronic resources that they just did not have, which meant that they were always behind the curve.
And so what then can be done? Because, look, what this is going to do is exacerbate those kids who are going to be further and further behind, not having access. When you talk about, look, there's assumption that every child has access to a computer or an iPad or some type of pad. They don't. And so you have some districts that simply don't have the resources to buy those as well. And so you may find a situation where some students are going to fall further back than their counterparts.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that there's so many other things that people are not even considering. I hear everyone talking about the resources for students or online learning, making sure they have laptops or internet access. But there's another part of this equation, making sure that educators are properly trained. You know, teaching is both an art and a skill. Having a flipped or digital classroom is not as simple as just turning the computer to yourself and then teaching kids and being accountable for them having learned the skills and acquired those lessons. So there's so many other things that so many teachers now are faced with now, the responsibility of having these digital or flipped classrooms, and they've never been trained appropriately. And I can't even imagine what's happening to our students with special needs who, you know, when we're having school districts all over the country, 1 million kids are being taught through packets and online learning. How are we addressing the needs of our special education students or the students who are disproportionately impacted who receive so many other services at school? All of those things will come to bear when we return to the classroom in the next couple weeks or months.
Well, I think for a lot of people, they're believing that we're not even going to return to the classroom. Here we now are in April. For instance, in Virginia, the governor's shelter in place goes through June 10th. And so you sort of have some people may be coming back, others may not. In the short term, though, parents are now realizing how important teachers are. People are driving. I'm seeing all these videos, people are going crazy, having to teach their kids. And so what advice do you give to parents to keep it together when it comes to trying to make sure their kids get educated, whether it's online or doing it on their own?
I think that's just it. Just keep it together. I mean, this is new for everyone. As a graduate student, I didn't like online classes, so I can't imagine we have young children who are taking 6 classes a day in the middle of the most stressful situation that they've ever been in. But I think we also have to remember that so many of our kids receive so many other services at school. I think of mental health services or kids who have access to therapies and treatments and different types of differentiated learning. And we can go back and forth all day about, that's the parent's responsibility or whose job it is to do that. I can tell you the one person who has no control over the situation is the children. And it is unconscionable right now that we have a Secretary of Education who has been mute. We have 100 million young people out of school. We have higher education college students out of school, and the Secretary has been mute in this whole pandemic, in this whole epidemic. She has not given any reassuring advice to educators, to families, to children as to what that will look like when we return. My office has gotten so many calls about what's included in this package. We allocated in Congress about $13.5 billion for K-12 education and about $14 billion for higher education. And there's so many questions surrounding what is the implementation of this education sustainability fund look like? How will this be applied across districts? What calculations will we use? And the one person we have not heard anything from is the Secretary of Education. And that just is unforgivable. And I'm not really sure how we come out of this. This is brand new, but I know that for so many years, teachers have worked under-resourced and underfunded and just figured it out. And I think that they're doing a great job of doing that now. I can tell you, though, it's not easy. I'm an educator. I am a highly competent educator. And right now, when I'm doing 8 hours of marathon conference calls and my son is in front of the computer, I have an 11-year-old who his teacher is giving him a lesson and I'm trying to keep him engaged and focused. I can't imagine people who have 2 or 3 children at home in different grades, studying different lessons, or parents who don't have the knowledge or the background to support them in their learning.
I've talked to some people who are having the issue. Bottom line is my wife and I have 2 of my nieces, both 16. They're sophomores who are at home. And luckily, their school district has a very robust online presence. Prior to this, they also have access to laptops. But in so many different places, you simply don't have that. And I think coming out of this, obviously we're operating in an emergency status right now. But I think coming out of this, you're going to have some people do some serious thinking and planning, strategizing, and then funding when it comes to filling in these gaps, because many of us have known about this. Other people have ignored it. Now, I think there are a lot of people out there who all of a sudden realize, oh, this thing is as worse as everybody keeps saying. And so we need to be thinking about how do we fix this, not just survive this.
You're absolutely right. And I think on a very basic level, I think one of the things that I was taken aback by when I first went to Congress is the resistance to fully funding the IDEA, the Individuals with Disability in Education Act. So many school districts are required by law to support their students with special needs first. And then the majority of their budget goes towards that. And then in any municipality, education is likely the largest budget expenditure. We really have to look at fully funding education, not in preparation for a pandemic, but just to fill in those gaps so that as school districts are in this type of situation, they would have already engaged in distance learning. They would have already had the resources. Students would already have had the supports that they needed at home, and we wouldn't be trying to backfill at this time. I think this is just revealing some systemic cracks that we have in our system. And as far as funding, there's so much that needs to be done. In this package, like I said, I think we had $13.5 billion for K-12 education and $14 billion for higher education. This is just to put people back at the starting line. They're still going to be behind. We have student loans that are paused until September. So many young people who are kicked off campuses. But now what are we doing for our homeless population and youths who have aged out of foster care? There's so many things to consider when we talk about the education system. And just the last thing I'll say is my office was inundated with a question, and I think this is a great place to kind of add clarity to that. In the third COVID package, Howard University was outlined specifically, along with Gallaudet, which is a school for the hard of hearing students. Those are congressionally directed universities. They have allocations in the funding every year in Congress, and they could not be included in the larger budget package. So they can't access the almost $30 billion that was put in for higher education and for elementary and secondary education. So they had to be specifically named in order for those schools to have appropriate funding that aligned with some of the other schools. It's just that simple. There was no, Democrats threw this in. It was, we understood that in order to be equitable with the resources, we had to specifically outline Howard University and schools like Gallaudet.
All right, then. Congresswoman Johanna Hayes of Connecticut, we certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
All right.
The teachers out there, they're doing a great job, and you definitely have the support of the entire Congress, or at least the Democrats.
All right, then. We certainly appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, folks. So we talk about one of the things that we've really been emphasizing to you are the critical voices that we need that are speaking to our interest right here on this issue of coronavirus. And so, and we've talked about why it's important to also support this platform. We put this together. If y'all want to understand what we've been able to do when it comes to this whole issue of coronavirus and emphasizing the importance of Black voices, I want y'all to check this out. Experts, you're not going to see them on cable news or broadcast news because you swear Black people aren't experts when it comes to this health crisis. That's why we have this show and why we do what we do every day on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Joining us right now is retired General Russell Honoré, the nation's first Black Surgeon General, Dr. Joycelyn Elders. John Hope Bryant, he's the founder of Operation Hope. Senator Kamala Harris of California, Dr. Cedrina Calder, retired General Lloyd Austin, Congresswoman Karen Bass, Commissioner Omari Hardick, Bureau President in Brooklyn, Eric Adams, Dr. Joseph Graves, America's Wealth Coach, Deborah Owens, Dr. Corey Abear, Patal Saul, Howard University student, Pastor Jamal Bryant, Dr. Christy McDowell, Benja Ajilore, Senior Economist at the Center for American Progress, Yola Daniels, again, author of the book, The Crisis of Voter Suppression in America. 4 stars, General Kip Ward. Dr. Oliver Brooks is President of the National Medical Association, President of the American Medical Association, Dr. Patrice Harris. Joby Benjamin, Dr. Alexia Gaffney, Infectious Disease Specialist. Dr. Georges Benjamin, Executive Director of the American Public Health Association. Malcolm Nance, Family Medicine Physician, Dr. Jen Caudle. Dr. Tashaka Cunningham, a molecular biologist, Kat Stafford. She's a national race and ethnicity reporter for the Associated Press. Dr. Wayne A.R. Frederick, who is the president of Howard University. Congresswoman Yvette Clark from the state of New York. William Springs, AFL-CIO economist. Andrea James, executive director of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. All right, let's go to Capitol Hill. Congressman Gregory Meeks, Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson of Texas, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, mental health clinician Jamie Singletary, Prince George's County State's Attorney Aisha Bradeboy, as well as Dylan Hayrie, ACLU Justice Division strategist. Dr. Cindy Duke, she is a virologist. Principal Steve Perry of Capitol Prep. Health and Wellness Specialist Dr. Yolandra Hancock. Desmond Meade, President of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. Cliff Albright, who is the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. Michael Harriet with The Root. Domina McWhorter, founder of Love by the Handles. Dr. Julianne Malvo, economist, president, Emerita Bennett College. Coroner Michael Fowler is a mayor of Atlanta. Keisha Lance Bottoms, mental health therapist. Suzette Clark, Justin Gibney, attorney and political strategist, and Bishop Vincent Matthews Jr. Dr. Suzette McKinney, CEO and executive director of the Illinois Medical District. Dr. Leon Madugal, president-elect of the National Medical Association. Jana Bailey, mayor of Moss Point, Mississippi. Mario King. We're going to keep driving this thing to make sure our people and in Wisconsin successfully sued in both state and federal court to block voters from being given extra time and options to cast votes in the middle of this pandemic. Voters headed to the polls today. Folks, we're going to show you some of the video of the long lines in Wisconsin. And last night, the U.S. Supreme Court voted 5-4 to allow Wisconsin to nullify tens of thousands of votes in their primary today for voters who were operating on a previously announced extended deadline to submit ballots. Here to discuss this latest voter suppression attempt in Wisconsin is Congresswoman Gwen Moore. Congresswoman, glad to have you on Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Thank you for letting me roll with you today, Roland.
It is shocking to watch some of this video, Congresswoman, and to see these long lines. I mean, frankly, Republicans are putting people's lives at stakes because they pushed forward with this election. When the governor issued an executive order, he'd already said he didn't have the authority. Then, of course, it got overturned by the Wisconsin State Supreme Court. I mean, this is diabolical what's happening there.
It really is, and what's at stake is that there's a state Supreme Court race on the ballot, and there's a terrible judge, which of course Donald Trump endorsed. Horrible, totally bought and paid for, and everybody knows it. And if we have the kind of turnout that they expect, he could be defeated. He's the incumbent. There were like 1.2 million absentee ballots requested for this election cycle.
And they knew exactly what was going on. They saw what was happening. And again, they fought every attempt, didn't care if folks are moving forward. But also, let's just be honest. Democrats didn't help. Vice President Joe Biden said, hey, people can be safe voting. The Democratic governor, frankly, should have been more aggressive in saying don't have this election. And so I think you have that going back and forth as well. But at the end of the day, Republicans would not work in any way in order to postpone this because they kept saying, oh, we got many offices that need to be filled based on this primary. But the real deal is we also know Republicans, when there are fewer people voting, they view that as an advantage. If there are more people voting, they view that as a disadvantage or an advantage for Democrats.
Okay, well, I just want to say one thing, just in defense of the governor. Our primary is the only one in April. Others have had their fabulous primaries already. And, it meant a lot that Donald Trump didn't square with us for 70 days.
Of course.
70 days. I mean, that is, we could have planned and moved the primary and did something then because the science is what told us that this week was going to be a surge week. And this is something that we didn't know back in February when the president was telling us that everything was fine.
Well, the real problem here is that, again, people's safety is being compromised. Folks, if y'all have the video, please roll it. I keep telling y'all to roll it. People voting. To see these lines, to see people out there in masks and gloves standing 6 feet apart. I read one story where Milwaukee normally has more than 100 voting locations, and today they're only 180, and today they're only 5.
Exactly. My polling site typically is right on the corner, the library right on the corner from my house. And now my polling site is 3 miles from my house. Well,
that is, in fact, I was reading a Twitter feed of a young lady who she follows me she's there in Milwaukee. She said that when she went out to vote, she said the early voting location was 30 minutes from her home. There was no buses running. She literally walked. And that, to me, is the nonsense for what Republicans are doing, because they are forcing people to literally walk or just frustrate them in not voting. And that was the intent. Pure and simple. That's their intent.
Well, I tell you, we'll have to hold our breaths for the next couple of weeks to see what kind of impact that has. Because I was concerned that I didn't see 6 feet between people standing in those lines. And, we have, one of the things that we've discovered here, I just want to share this with you, is that I think while we don't know why there seems to be such a disproportionate numbers of people who are afflicted with COVID-19 in the African-American community around the country, and particularly here in Milwaukee, we have already discerned that racism is a public health problem. And all of the attendant things that go on with it, even when you're middle-class Black people, you are in very hyper-segregated neighborhoods. It's very dense populated. There are lots of people around who have no health insurance to take care of themselves. There are people who don't have any choice but to go to work when they're sick, and they work in the service industry every single day, in hospital settings and nursing home settings. in particular. And so there are going to be plenty of studies done, I assure you, about COVID-19 and pandemics and its association with poverty.
Well, this is just utterly ridiculous, I think, what is going on in your state. Unfortunately, the election did go forward, but I hope that people are out there, that they are voting, that they are recognizing what Republicans are doing. And we have seen what took place when you had a Democratic governor who won, how the Republican legislature did the same thing in North Carolina, changed the rules, stripped him of power. What I keep telling people over and over and over again, Republicans do not care about what's right and wrong. It's all about a naked power grab. You better understand that because we're going to see a repeat of this. If this thing continues through the fall, we're going to see Republicans across the country try to do the exact same thing, limit mail-in balloting in states because they want to suppress the vote.
Exactly. Well, shame on us, if we fall for it, because there's no guarantee that this pandemic is not going to have a resurgence in the fall. So we need to get busy, change our organizing style, and try to get as many folks signed up for those absentee ballots as we possibly can. Early vote. And, I'm a person, Martin, Roland, I enjoy same-day voting. So I could have gotten caught up in one of those lines today.
Right.
And I can't afford to do that because I'm on oral chemo and I can't afford to be in the mix like that.
Well, look, here, I'm going to show this video right now of the idiot's Speaker of the House there in Robin Voss there in Milwaukee. So, guys, go to my iPad. Here's a video of him proclaiming how safe it is to vote. He says it's incredibly safe to go out. He is literally decked in a full suit, gloves, and mask. How in the hell can you say it's incredibly safe to go out when you are dressed like you a damn medical worker?
Right. Depriving some medical worker of that mask.
I mean, it's crazy. You cannot be dressed like that and then say, oh, it's incredibly safe to go out.
Exactly.
Unbelievable.
And they don't care about the science in this instance because I think they were looking at the disparate numbers of absentee ballots that were returned in the inner city versus those in suburbia. I had a little cheat sheet here, but there are many hundreds or many thousands of ballots in the city of Milwaukee and in Dane County, Madison, liberal Madison, which have not been returned versus in the more red parts of our state. And so that's also an incentive to make sure we get this election done. All
right, then. Congresswoman Gwen Moore, Wisconsin. We surely appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Hey, it's always good to be with you, Roland.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Here to continue the conversation is Ellie Mistel. He is executive editor of Above, actually writes with The Nation. Man, you wrote this piece, and I keep making the point to people. Republicans are not trying to play fair. This is about power, Ellie. It's about control. Pure and simple.
This is part of the Republican plot to steal the November election. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic when I say that. I'm not trying to be a fearmonger when I say it. This is their plan to use this pandemic to steal the November election. And as we've seen it play out in Wisconsin, what we've seen play out in Wisconsin is what will play out across the nation if we are not prepared and if we do not do anything to stop them. Republicans always, and you were already saying this, Republicans always understand that the fewer people who vote, the better it is for Republicans. Donald Trump, who understands almost nothing, has already said that, well, if you let everybody vote, Republicans can never win. They understand at their core that if everybody votes, Republicans lose. And so their plan is to not let everybody vote. the way that they can use coronavirus to suppress the vote is exactly like we've seen in Wisconsin. You have quarantine set up. You make people understand that they shouldn't be going outside, which they shouldn't. They understand, though, that because of what Fox News is doing, their people are much more willing to risk the danger of being outside in public in large gatherings because they think it's a hoax. Democratic voters know it's not a hoax, do want to stay safe, do want to be healthy, and so we are respecting quarantine, self-quarantine, shelter-in-place orders or whatever. But that means that the only way you can vote is by mail. So look at what happened in Wisconsin. First, the governor asked to mail all voters absentee ballots. The Republicans said no. Then the governor said, okay, let's have a situation where we extend the deadline for absentee voting, which makes a whole lot of sense if you have people who thought they were going to be able to vote in person and then realized they couldn't vote in person. Republicans said no. So the Democratic National Committee sued. And the court said yes, the lower court, and then they got to the Supreme Court where there are 5 Republicans who happen to wear robes waiting for them, and it's those 5 Republicans who said, no, Republicans need to win elections. And their ruling basically threw out the potential of people to vote absentee unless they postmark their ballots by today, Election Day.
Well, here's what
there are people who don't have their ballots.
Right.
How can you send in a ballot by Election Day if you don't get your ballot until the end of the week?
Well,
Wisconsin voters are not time travelers.
Well, check this out.
They can't do it.
Just a few moments ago, the White House, Yamiz tweeted this. President Trump just now in the White House, quote, mail ballots are very dangerous for this country. The mail ballots are corrupt, in my opinion. This is the same dumbass who voted by mail, by absentee in Florida.
Yep. I mean, it's all a grift, Roland. None of this is done in good faith. All right. Remember, the only actual example of voter fraud we have is when Republicans in North Carolina were trying to defraud people out of their absentee ballots. That's the situation. Okay, so the Republicans now turning around and saying that absentee ballots are not safe. Well, it's because you're trying to steal them. Like that's why they're not safe. It's the bank robber saying the bank is not secure enough because they're running away with all the money. It's hard to express how devious their plan is and how simple it is. I think that's what kind of gets a lot of people.
Well, I think
it can't be that obvious. But no, it is that obvious.
Yeah, but here's the deal, though. I think it's the reason I think it's that obvious. And let's just be real honest. Is because, frankly, Democrats want to be fair, want to be not like perfect example. Thomas Friedman writes, the New York Times writes this idiotic column today, talking about this, this unity cabinet that Joe Biden should appoint. And anytime there's discussions about unity cabinet, it's always, if you're a Democrat, you should appoint several Republicans. Republicans never talk about appointing several Democrats. They don't care. It's all about winning. And I keep telling Democrats, these guys don't believe in fair. Donald Trump, the Republican National Committee, the entire apparatus, Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy, go North Carolina, Wisconsin, Maine, Alabama, Florida, Mississippi, Arkansas, Texas. They don't care about fair. They care about winning.
I have no idea how to educate Democrats to this reality. Thomas Friedman's article today was basically, even if the Democrats win, they should pretend that they lost. Like that is the level of intellectual dishonesty that he was operating at today in the New York Times. There is a need by a certain segment of the Democratic population, a certain segment of the party, to appear fair to Republicans who.
Looks like go right out.
Am I back?
We're back. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, so there's a part of the Democratic Party that wants to appear fair to the Republicans who hate them. And that is why we lose. We are consistently bringing a knife to a gunfight. Or not even a knife. We're consistently bringing a wet noodle to a gunfight. We don't have the will, it seems, in large parts of our party, it feels, does not have the will to go to the mattresses to fight fire with fire to beat these people. We don't have the messaging. We can't stay on message. We don't have the organizational chops. We always seem kind of surprised and confused by their next level of evil machinations that always like catches us off guard. Of course they're going to try to steal the election. That's what they do. And we're never prepared to fight that battle in the trenches with them. One of the things that I've been saying literally since they installed an illegitimate justice on the Supreme Court in Neil Gorsuch, to say nothing of when they installed an alleged attempted rapist on the Supreme Court in Brett Kavanaugh, is that the minute Democrats take back control of the White House and the Senate, they need to pack the courts. That's literally the only way to overcome the lifetime appointments that the Republicans have illegitimately placed on that body. But I say that in a room full of Democrats, and 20-30% of them be like, yeah, absolutely, and the other 70% will be like, well, we don't want to break the system. So part of it, Roland, though, I don't want to defend this kind of thinking, but part of the way that I can understand this kind of thinking is that fundamentally, to be a Democrat means that you have to believe that systems work. Fundamentally, being a Republican means that you don't believe systems work. So for Republicans, it's kind of quite easy for them to say, well, let's burn it down. Doesn't matter. Either we win or nobody wins. Either we win or there's chaos. That's an easy argument for Republicans to make. It's a little bit harder for Democrats to get there, and I kind of get that kind of philosophically and pedagogically, right? Like, it's a little bit harder for us to get to the point where we have to do everything that we can to win and be willing to throw the book out while we're doing it.
Absolutely. Elliot, I appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot, folks. Go to thenation.com to read his piece. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for giving me an excuse to wear a shirt.
All right, thanks a lot. We'll do it again. All right, folks. All right, I got to deal with this here because it's really been pissing me off, okay? And that is all of these people who have been acting a fool, losing their mind when it comes to this issue of 5G and coronavirus. It's really, and I mean really, getting on my damn nerves, okay? An attack on cell phone towers in the UK over the weekend. They were destroyed. Comes as this whole thing goes around that 5G is spreading coronavirus, and that's how it got started. Joining me right now is Shireen Mitchell, social analyst, diversity strategist. Shireen, I am sick of black people and these white people talking about 5G as the root of coronavirus. Can you please lay this out?
Oh my goodness. So thank you so much for having me on here to have this conversation, because the reason that we're having this problem is because this comes from a disinformation about the problems with 5G. But it also started, which is the way this always starts, is it's very racist conversation about what happened in Wuhan in China. And in one instance, there is a group of people who tore down the 5G tower in China. It had nothing to do with the virus. And somehow that video goes viral and people believe it. And so that's what we're dealing with. And now we're watching people actually do physical things, i.e. take down other 5G towers, because they believe it has something to do with the virus. It has nothing to do, one has nothing to do with the other. Their radiation poisoning is not the same thing as a virus. They do not equate. They do not have the same responses. They do not have the same outcomes in terms of symptoms. But it's very clear that people try to use a video in one instance to connect the dots to another. And so it's like for our communities, because I've heard the same thing over and over again in different ways. I've watched it come up from different perspectives. I am stunned that people see this as some level of like, this is where it really started from. This is the same argument about where's the origin? And it was maybe in a lab. It's the same debate, just in a different form. And it happens to deal with technology. But yes, I want to make sure that we understand that this has nothing to do with 5G. Does 5G have some issues that we should talk about? Absolutely. But it has nothing to do with the virus.
Hold tight one second. Hold on one second. Let's go to the White House. Dr. Birx is speaking. I think she's talking about African Americans being impacted. Go ahead.
wanted to go through the numbers at a high level so you understand why particularly these supplies went to these areas to begin with. We talk about attack rates or the cases per population. So in the New York, as a state, they have 7 cases per 1,000. This is the highest in the country in New York City itself.
All right, she was just talking about getting the message out to Black and Native American communities. So we'll pull that video later. Shireen, what people don't realize is the cell phone towers we have, they've been used for years. And again, well, I don't understand. First of all, we also need to, New York Times, Shireen, did a story last year that it was RT, Russia Television, that network that they now have airing all over the place. You got Black people who are on it. In fact, I've been invited to do several shows on there. I'm not going on. It's funded by the Russians. They did a story, New York Times did a story on how they're the ones who start spreading that whole deal. And I need Black people to stop spreading this because we're falling for too many of these conspiracy theories.
Yes, we are. So there's a couple of pieces here what I think is really important, because I think you brought up 2 key pieces. There are people who think they're finding something new, something different, some scoop, some information that's not being shared by the media and others. And they're now distributing that disinformation to other people because they think, like, I found something that nobody else knows and nobody will share, or the videos are being taken down. It's like the videos are being taken down because they're spreading disinformation and they should not be up. That's number 1. Number 2, we have had cell towers since the beginning of time. These exact same cell towers are the exact same cell towers that worked for 2G, 4G, and now 5G. They're not new towers. They didn't just come out of nowhere. I think that's also key parts of it. So we've dealt with cell tower information and issues for years before the virus. So the fact that people are trying to connect those to that is false. Are we now finally getting into more 5G being more distributed at this moment? Absolutely. But that has nothing to do with the virus. And the other thing I want to say about the virus, the other piece of disinformation that's happening, is that some people think that the coronavirus is new, like coronavirus is new. What's new is COVID-19. Coronavirus has existed in different forms. It has different names. It didn't just show up today. It's been showing up before. And so if people don't understand this, like, you think you found something new when there's history even about the coronavirus that existed before now. So every time someone thinks they find something or they're distributing information and then they share it to their family and friends, they're harming our community. They think that they are saving our community, or they think that they're telling our community something that we don't already know. And that's also very problematic. Now, let me just also be clear. I know in our community we have dealt with the government harming us, the healthcare systems harming us in different ways. There's a historical narrative to that. So I don't want to dismiss the concerns. But when those concerns turn into disinformation to the point that is dangerous to us, then we need to halt and we need to stop sharing that kind of information.
Well, that's why we called you. We want to be able to push that message home. It's crucially just important. And I just keep trying to tell people, look, I need y'all to stop spreading this, just like I need all of these Black preachers. I really, 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 I need y'all to not have church. There was a story that was, I'm going to pull up in a second, christianpost.com. 3 more Black pastors are dead because of coronavirus. They attended a funeral, and then one guy who preached possibly could have infected 300 people who attended a funeral. And so we just really, really need these folks to stop, okay? I know y'all want to go to church, but same thing. Stop sitting all this stuff talking about I got the blood of Jesus. No, guess what? If you actually read Exodus, when they had that 10th plague, God said, mark the blood above your home. So God passes over your home. But it said, stay your behind inside. That's what the Bible said. The Bible says stay your behind inside. Go read it, Exodus 12:7. Or y'all going to have an exodus out of this world because y'all going to be dying. And it makes no sense to folks to be dying unnecessarily because some of y'all don't know how to keep your asses at home. And yes, I'm cussing because I'm tired of church people using excuses for why they're going to church. You're putting people at risk, not only those who attend, but their families as well. When you do it, go to church online, pray at your house, listen to your gospel music, but be safe. Shireen, we appreciate it. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you for having me.
All right, folks. So here's the deal. We're going to talk right now about small businesses and the impacts they're having when it comes to the money, accessing the money from Congress. Joining us right now is Ron Busby. He is the CEO, U.S. Black Chambers, Inc. Ron, glad to have you back on Roland Martin Unfiltered. I'm hearing from a lot of small businesses, Ron, who's saying they're being screwed by this, and that banks are not banks are giving favorable treatment to larger customers. Also, very few some banks haven't even begun to process these applications. What are you hearing from your members?
I'm hearing a little bit of both, and thank you for Roland for having us on. The U.S. Black Chamber has been at the forefront of this conversation for weeks now. So we were at the table, and we were making the issue then that we felt like black and small businesses were going to be hurt the most. If you look at all the legislation, the 700-plus pages throughout the legislation, you will never see the word black or African-American, Hispanic, Asian, gay or lesbian. All you will see is the words small. And we know that in our communities, the majority of our businesses are ultimately small, extremely small. The majority of our 2.6 million African-American-owned businesses are not mom and pop, but mom or pop, one employee. So for our businesses, it is going to be extremely difficult to access the dollars because of a couple of reasons. You already have had to have had a relationship with a bank, so you got to go back there. We know that most black businesses have a checking account, a debit card, possibly a credit card, but typically we don't have access to credit, so we don't have a relationship with a lending officer or a loan officer or the SBA. Most of us are just operating on cash flow, and so when you're saying that now a black-owned business has to establish a relationship with a bank lender, with banks being closed, having to process that online, but the software is difficult to use, the applications are crashing on the system constantly. Yes, our businesses are feeling it more so than anyone else in the country. We heard from the president today talking to several of the largest banks around the country. They are making loans, but they will tell you that they, over the course of the weekend, have accessed over 500,000 applications, and they don't have the infrastructure to even process those loans. So this is going to be difficult now as well as in the future. We have been telling businesses to try to get their applications, their information, payroll, documentation together and get to the bank as soon as possible because this money will run out. Many of our minority and small community banks don't really have the funds to be able to participate. Many of our businesses don't have relationships with them. So all in all, we are going to see a lot of our businesses go out of business, but we will also see some new businesses come through this and get started because of this.
When you talk about, so what do they do then? I mean, because bottom line is, I mean, look, Congress is. I've been texting various senators and members of the House, and then you saw today, Mitch McConnell came back and said they're going to have to do another bill to help small businesses. At $350 billion wasn't enough.
Yeah, we knew that coming out of the gate that $350 billion was only going to be a drop in the bucket, and we also knew that you have every business in America trying to access those dollars. And small minority-owned businesses were going to be at the back of the line. So, yes, we've had conversations about another stimulus package coming out. Don't know the dollar amount yet, but we do feel like there is going to be some additional funding. We think that minority banks, financial institutions that are serving minority communities need to make sure that, I hate to use the word set aside, but they got to have access to these dollars so that they can make sure that they flow into our communities across the country.
All right, Ron, hold tight 1 second. I'm going to go to a break.
Sure thing.
We come back from commercial break, folks. We're going to pay tribute. We're going to pay tribute to Earl Graves, of course, who is the founder of Black Enterprise. And so we'll do that. We'll go to a break in a moment, and we'll be back right here, Roland Martin Unfiltered. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Late last night, folks, we got news that Earl G. Graves Sr., founder of Black Enterprise, the company that focused on entrepreneurship and black business, died at 9:22 p.m. Eastern at the age of 85. His son and current BE CEO, Earl Butch Graves Jr., tweeted that he passed away quietly after a long battle with Alzheimer's. Graves was first launched Black Enterprise in 1970 in an effort to cover black businesses and also to provide business strategies to the magazine's readership. His efforts paid off. As of 2019, the magazine reaches 4 million readers. They also have numerous conferences all across the country. Graves went on to create Earl G. Graves Limited, the parent company of Earl G. Graves Publishing Company, which produces Black Enterprise magazine. Butch Graves Jr. became the CEO in 2006, though Sr. remained as chairman. In addition to his work in media, he also served as CEO of Pepsi Cola, one of their bottle distributors between 1990 and 1998. Accolades have been pouring in on social media, as you see from the tweets we're showing you right now, folks. Here's some of those tweets. Go ahead and pull them up, please. Of course, you see right here, Cornell William Brooks, former CEO of the NAACP. This is from the Congressional Black Caucus Institute. They're giving their condolences to Earl Graves. This is Reverend Al Sharpton. Also talk about the impact of Earl Graves. And then this is the tweet, of course, from his son, Butch Graves Jr., announcing his passing, his Maya Cummings, the widow of Congressman Elijah Cummings as well, who's running for his seat. And, of course, National Urban League paid tribute to Earl Graves as well. Folks, I'm going to go back to Ron Busby, please. Of course, I was talking to Ron. Ron, of course, is president of U.S. Black Chambers, Inc. Ron, just share with our folks watching how vital Earl Graves was to the development and the fostering of black entrepreneurship across this country.
There's a saying for brothers, men that are in the 100 Black Men, that we can't be what we can't see, or we can be what we see. So many African Americans saw the future of black business through Black Enterprise. We were able to flip through the pages and see our future as well as our present. He was not only the editor, the business owner, but a visionary, and allowed that vision to transpire to black people across the globe. You have had young people in other countries all recognize what he has done for our community. And for that, we will always and forever be indebted. Personally, I was able to meet him so many different times. As a small business owner, I was in his top 100. That gave us the accolades that other companies around the country said, hey, if they're good enough to be recognized by Black Enterprise, they're good enough to do business with our firm. And I think so many of us don't get that acknowledgement from regular organizations. Black Enterprise was that entity that allowed us to showcase who we are, what we do, and more importantly, what we can do when we're given the opportunity. All of us here at U.S. Black Chamber, as well as our 145 chamber presidents around the country, truly will be missing him for lifetimes, and we look forward to continuing his success by his son as well as other business owners across the country.
Again, when you talk about seeing it and profiling in those pages, and I'm going to pull up in a second. I mean, if you look at in terms of that growth, I mean, you're talking about exponential growth going from 1972 to where we are present day.
Yeah, I remember in '72, and I was just a young guy back in Oakland, California, and my parents used to bring the magazine home and leave it on our mantle, leave it on the kitchen table, and my sister and I would read through and just see ideas of businesses that we never knew that we owned. And because of that, it just gave so many young people as well as business owners that drive to say, you know, hey, if there's somebody across the country doing it, that it's going to provide me that vision, that competitiveness, that I can do it as well. And for that, man, he just allowed all of us to grow, not only Black Enterprise growth, not just through his events, but it also allowed other magazines like Essence Magazine, like so many other local Black establishments to also be able to get their voices out there because they understood that Black people were consumers, and so they marketed to us where they had never really had a vision of marketing to Black people before, but it also allowed us to tell our stories of our own consumerism, our own consumer dollars, as well as our own business acumen.
All right, then. Ron Busby, we certainly appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Folks, I'm going to go to this chart right here. Go to my iPad, please, just so you understand. And so this is the chart here. These are the number of Black-owned businesses that when Black Enterprise started. You see this chart, 1972. There were 187,602 Black-owned businesses. In 2012, the number was around 2.58 million. It sits now around 2.6 million. And so I am not attributing all of that growth to Earl Graves, but I can guarantee you, seeing the stories, seeing all of the different ways in order to grow a business in Black Enterprise, certainly I think you can do that. Right now, I want to go to the phone lines. Bob Brown, he was one of the folks who worked alongside. Okay, we have Alfred Edmonds. Sorry, I was going to go to Bob. Y'all told me Bob is on here. So Alfred Edmonds, of course, he's a longtime staff writer with Black Enterprise, editor there. Alfred, how you doing?
I'm doing great, brother. How are you?
Doing good. Certainly is a sad day for all the folks in the Black Enterprise family, losing the patriarch of the magazine.
Yes, but as I've been sharing with so many people, former employees, former interns, entrepreneurs, executives, I mean, he touched so many lives. You know, you take that scripture, weeping lasts for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And while we are certainly hurt, we are also fully embracing the opportunity to celebrate all that he has contributed. And that celebration will go on for some time because it's almost hard to put into words or a single tribute all that he has done and the impact of his legacy.
Explain to folks really how much of a towering figure he is. In a moment, we're going to hear from Lyndon Johnson Rice. I interviewed her earlier. And I said, frankly, if you were creating a Mount Rushmore for Black media, it would be John H. Johnson, it would be Earl Graves, and it would be, of course, the founders, Ed Lewis and others of Essence Magazine.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. You know, the best way I saw it put a few hours ago was Earl Graves taught us what Black excellence was before there was Black Twitter. I mean, he represented excellence in how he presented himself. He represented excellence in terms of what he believed in for Black people around the world and Black Americans in particular. And from a personal standpoint, and those of us who worked with him and for him, he believed in us as examples of Black excellence. So, you know, he really communicated right away that if you were working with him or for him, he expected great things from you, and you were willing to run through brick walls to deliver for him. And that was kind of a universal impact he had on everybody who knew him, worked for him, worked with him. You know, the impact is just hard to put into a few sentences when you talk about that expectation of excellence and that being part of the heritage of being what it means to be African American.
The BE 100s, of course, the list of the top 100 black-owned businesses, it was a huge creation. When you think about Fortune lists, when you think about these other different lists, what it really did was serve as a barometer for many of these black-owned businesses, but also it sent a signal to the rest of the country that there were black folks who own companies that were at scale. And as Ron Busby just said, it allowed other companies to be able to say, oh, here, folks, we could actually partner with.
Well, it did several things. One, prior to the BE 100s list, nobody measured the rankings of the largest black-owned companies anyway. I mean, we all knew in our individual communities, the black-owned funeral home, the black-owned retail outlets, the barbershops, but no one really categorized in a real significant way the economic impact of these businesses. The second thing it did is made them aware of each other, which created a community and a network that's necessary for all businesses to grow. You don't grow without those kinds of relationships. So it brought together nationally an awareness that we do have a legacy of entrepreneurs. Eventually, it became a good housekeeping seal of approval as corporations were looking for credible businesses to establish relationships with through supplier diversity and other things. And making the BE 100s list kind of became almost a good housekeeping seal of approval, or at least was a starting point for major corporations to identify black-owned businesses and entrepreneurs that they could do business with. And all of that spurred what you talked about a little earlier, the exponential growth of black-owned businesses over the last 30 to 40 years, because all those things came together to put black business on the map. No longer could corporations say, oh, I'd love to do business with the African-American community, but I can't find qualified businesses to do it. The BE 100s list in particular took that away and created even more wealth in the black community as a result.
Obviously, we know about him professionally. Just give folks a sense of what it was like personally for you.
Well, first of all, I mean, his impact on us as young people, I got hired at Black Enterprise at age 26. My 27th birthday was a few days after I got hired. He was a big believer in getting the best and brightest young people he could find and putting us in positions of authority and responsibility, trusting in our talent, knowing we would make some mistakes, but getting out of our way and let us grow. And if you look at the roster of current and former Black Enterprise employees, interns, editors, salespeople, and how we've gone on to do great things in our own careers, that was because Mr. Graves, he didn't just talk about investing in young black people. He really believed in it. I took over the magazine at age, I wasn't even 35 yet. Cheryl Hilliard Tucker, who was made the leader of the magazine when she was in her late 20s. And I could name person after person, Derek Dingle and others, who we got the reins of authority in our early 20s. And that went to our interns who are all going on to do great things. The second thing was great is that it was fun to work for. I mean, you took a certain amount of pride in realizing that we were among the best of the best. We walked around knowing we were among the best of the best, because you don't last long at Black Enterprise if you don't believe that and you don't deliver that. But also, he has a great sense of humor. He's just so much fun. We laugh a lot and joke a lot at BE, and that's part of it because we had a CEO who believed in people, having fun and having a good time, even as we were doing serious work and working really hard to deliver excellence every day. So it was always a fun place to work, especially back in the day when I was young. But did you ever say, Mr. Graves, when you gonna cut them lamb chops? Not me. You ain't getting that from me, bro. I had the pleasure of editing his column, our award-winning column, and won a number of NABJ awards, as well as other awards, the publisher's page, that he had continued even up until only a few years ago when he stopped doing it. And so I got to literally sit at his feet, at least once a month, more than that, because I had to work with him on his column and what he wanted to say and how he wanted to say it. And they're just some of the most treasured moments of my life, to be able to learn from him, to see how he thought, and to really see his authentic passion for people, and not just the most important people, not just presidents and CEOs. This is a man that, bell caps and waiters and FedEx delivery men got the same kind of attention from him and therefore loved him just as much because he was authentic all the way up and down the line whether you were supposedly famous and important or you were just a regular guy just trying to make a living.
Last question for you. If I'm correct, Black Enterprise also was the first black magazine to put Obama on the cover, him calling for Obama to run for president?
Yeah, I mean, that's another great example of, me and Butch Graves, the current CEO, the oldest son of Mr. G, and Derek Dingle, we often joke that Mr. Graves is probably say, "What are you guys doing?" But joking aside, he trusted us. And when we suggested to him that we had another cover planned for that first issue that he was on the cover, and Barack Obama was on, I think, 5 covers in total ultimately. But the first cover when he was running, or that was the second cover actually, when he was running for president, we went out on the limb and said, we think we can win this thing. And that was before it was apparent to the rest of the nation that that was a possibility. Mr. Graves trusted our judgment, gave me and Butch and Derek his blessings, and we went forward and put him on the cover, and it turned out to be prescient. But that's just another example of how Mr. Graves really walked the walk of saying, I hire my people, I believe in my people, they're the best and the brightest you can get. And he bet on us, and he won a lot because he bet on us, and we believed in ourselves because he believed in us.
All right, Alfred Edmonds, but man, it was always appreciated. Certainly our thoughts and prayers go out to all of the employees of Black Enterprise. He certainly was a towering figure, someone who was greatly respected, not only in the magazine business, but certainly within the space of Black media. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Roland.
All right, folks. Joining us right now is Bob Brown. Bob was a close associate, confidant, board member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference under Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Then he went to go work for the Nixon administration as his top black aide. Bob, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Roland?
Bob, it's always good talking with you. When I interviewed you a few weeks ago, I had not finished your book. Of course, your book is right here. You Can't Go Wrong Doing Right. How a child of poverty rose to the White House and helped change the world by Robert J. Brown. And in this book, you talk about Earl Graves. And in this book, you talk about the creation of the Office of Minority Business Enterprise within the Department of Commerce under Richard Nixon. You say here, I'm going to read this here, we took a lot of flack from Democrats and other skeptics who claimed Nixon didn't care about black America. Still, even some diehard Democrats knew that blacks inside the Nixon administration were quietly pushing the agenda endorsed by Dr. King. One of those in the know was my old friend Earl G. Graves, who was a leading black Democrat at the forefront of pushing for black entrepreneurship and economic growth. He saw that with the OMBE, Nixon was reaching out with a program unlike others. Thank goodness you were there, because he was about $100,000 short of raising the money to launch Black Enterprise. And you had to fight a lot of white folks who were like, Bob, we're not giving to this black man.
Yeah, Roland, you're right. Earl, I go back a long way with Earl. When he got out of the military, Earl was a top military guy, and he was really gung-ho. And he came to work with me at the Federal Bureau of Narcotics in the New York office. We worked in the same group there, and there were very few blacks there at the time, and Earl came in from the first day. He made a statement there at the Bureau, and we became close friends. We traveled together. He used to visit me here in North Carolina all the time with his wife Barbara and his sons when they were little boys. And then he called me one day and said he was going to he was start Black Enterprise, and he was going to do a lot of this and a lot of that. And I said, well, I'll be supportive. And but even before then, we worked with Robert Kennedy together. Earl was administrative assistant to Mr. Kennedy in New York, and we worked in his campaign together until he was killed. And then we all got together at Earl's place on Long Island, and along with Johnny Ford and several others who were working with him, Johnny Ford, the mayor of Tuskegee, Alabama, and we decided that we were going to do different kinds of things. Earl and those stayed with the campaign at that time, the Democratic campaign of Humphrey, and I decided to go with Nixon with some of my friends, my other friends, and it was quite a time. We remained friends.
Did we lose Bob there, folks? Let me know. Let me know when y'all got Bob back. And so this is what Bob writes in his book. I encouraged him to apply for one of the first OMBE grants when word got out that Earl Graves, a big Democrat and a frequent critic of Nixon, had applied for the grant. That was heated opposition from partisan Republican operatives who didn't want it approved. I argued forcefully that Earl wanted the same things we wanted for Black America, and that if we helped him develop his business, he would support economic development in the Black community. They told me I was nuts, not to mention naive and probably numbskull too. My final response was, process his damn application, Bob.
That's exactly what I told him, and they processed it too. Yeah, and he got the money, and it helped to launch him forevermore. He was a great human being. He was my friend for many, 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 many years. We worked together. We did a lot of things together in politics and business, and he was a magnificent human being, and I will always remember him fondly.
Bob Brown, it was a pleasure talking with you, man, to reflect back on the life and legacy of Earl Graves Sr. Of course, that photo right there is a photo of you, of Johnny Ford, and Earl Graves enjoying a huge laugh there. And so it's always been great talking with you.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you're trying to do the right thing, and you're trying to lift up our people, it doesn't make any difference between Democrats and Republicans. I've worked on both sides, and wherever we work, we've got to be for our people. We got to lift up our people.
Yes, indeed. Bob Brown, we appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot.
Yes, sir.
All right, folks, joining us right now is one of those other titans of Black media, Ed Lewis, who was the co-founder of Essence Magazine. Ed, welcome to Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Roland, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, sir. Just want to get just your initial thoughts on us losing one of our titans, Earl Graves Sr.
Well, you know, Black Enterprise started in August of 1970. Essence started in May of 1970. So we're both celebrating 50 years of publishing and doing something so meaningful, I think, for our community. And certainly I take my hat off to my dear friend, fellow publisher, who we tried to make a difference with regard to how we were being dealt with economically within our community.
Give folks, give people an understanding what life was like. What was it like for startup magazines, Black magazines, 1970, 2 years removed from the assassination of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the tumultuous 60s. Black media companies today are able to do deals with major advertisers. It was not easy for an Earl Graves Sr., for you at Essence, or for John H. Johnson at Ebony.
No, indeed. We were always fighting the fight to get accepted, particularly for the audience that we represented. Advertising was always an issue with regard to all our magazines, and we fought hard. One of the things I'm deeply feel very good about is the way Earl, John Johnson and I worked together, going collectively to advertising agencies and to major corporations, and selling them on the importance of Black media, a Black company. It wasn't about us individually making efforts on our behalf. We wanted to make sure that Black media was heard, and we wanted to get our fair share. So we worked together.
And that idea of working together was important because, although y'all were, quote, competitors, you were also operating in different spaces. And so I'm quite sure y'all all said, look, it make more sense for us to, we all can't be in the same place at the same time, but we bond together. And so how often do the three of y'all actually strategize and meet and talk about how can we all get a piece of this pie?
We met very often. We flew either to Chicago or New York or wherever to meet corporate America, and we spoke on behalf of Black media because we knew that in the end, it's about uplifting our people, making opportunity for those of us working in business so that we all can enjoy this incredible American pie that we help build and create for this country.
Last question for you. Obviously, Black Enterprise focused on Black business. And when you look at the growth of Black businesses going from a little more than 100,000 in 1972 to now 2.6 million, I would dare say Black Enterprise played a critical role because when you look at the articles dealing with just basic stuff, how to start a business, loan processing, franchising, all of those things, and being able to, as Ron Busby said, being able to see people doing other things in other areas, that had to cause somebody to have hey, wait a minute, I can do that as well.
No doubt about it. We owe a great deal of debt to Black Enterprise for showing us the way, writing articles, how to capitalize, how to start your own business, the importance of cash, and helping to be able to stay alive were all important with regard to what Black Enterprise has done for so many Black businesses and for the African American community.
Ed Lewis, co-founder of Essence Magazine. Ed, it's always a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so very much.
My pleasure, my friend. Take care.
All right, folks, before I came live on the show, I had the opportunity to record an interview real quick when I was at home with Linda Johnson Rice. She, of course, the daughter of Ebony Jet founder John H. Johnson. Here's our conversation about Earl Graves Sr. So, Linda, we've lost another titan, certainly one of our legends, and of course, in the Black media space, one of, frankly, the pillars.
No question about that. First of all, Roland, thank you for having me on and asking me to talk about Earl Graves, an incredible icon, a giant of a man, a friend of my father, John Johnson, that's for sure, and someone that, for me, I've always looked up to and admired and respected. You know, the Johnsons and the Graves were always good friends. I mean, it goes back for decades. And so I think there's always been a great deal of respect and admiration for everything that Earl Graves and Black Enterprise and all of the offshoots of Black Enterprise that have developed over the years. We've always had a great respect, and I've always had a great respect for him and for his family. And I had the great fortune to speak to his son Butch this morning and express my heartfelt sympathies to he and to his family.
And when we think about the role played, I mean, when you look at history and culture and entertainment, when you think about Ebony, when you think about Essence targeting Black women, when you think about Black Enterprise with Black business, I mean, really, you know, Ebony, Jet, Essence, Black Enterprise represents the Mount Rushmore, if you will, of Black media.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. And you know, Black Enterprise really came along and filled that void where there wasn't really a voice for business, just strictly for business. I mean, you had white counterparts, you had Forbes magazine and Fortune magazine, but there was nothing really that was strictly for business for African Americans, and voila, here's Black Enterprise. And they've just done a tremendous job of chronicling so many things that have happened, both good and bad, the trials and tribulations and the challenges that African Americans have faced with Black business. And that all is thanks to Earl Graves. I mean, he is the one who opened that door, who started to write about this and report about this and really help us to see ourselves as business people and to help us try to think about how to develop our own business, how to be entrepreneurs. And so that's what's so wonderful about Black Enterprise and about what Earl Graves really founded and started, and that his son Butch continues.
He also was someone who I think that people, if you're in the black media space today, whether it's black owned or black targeted, you really have to, I believe, show appreciation to Earl Graves, to your father, because 1970, you're talking about 2 years after MLK is killed. Corporate America, okay, we're looking at black, but they really went in and were the ones who were saying, no, we have an audience here you should be advertising to. So when you look at people who are able to go out, I mean, the platform that I have, be able to go out and get sponsors, I mean, really, Earl Graves and John H. Johnson really were the ones who broke through those doors to get those meetings, to get these companies to understand there was value in the black consumer and they needed to advertise.
Oh, there's no question about that. And you would be surprised how many times John Johnson and Earl Graves worked together to really break the doors down for mainstream marketing, to really understand, in mainstream companies to really understand the value of the African-American dollar. They weren't really rivals. They were really more friendly competitors and compatriots, and really did work together on a lot of things. I'll tell you one quick story. My father served on the board of Chrysler Corporation for several years, and when it came time for him to retire, the one and only person that he recommended take his place was Earl Graves, and it did happen. Absolutely.
I'm sure it did. I'm sure it did. Yes.
Absolutely. Because he knew that Earl would continue to be a champion for African Americans, and that Earl would speak on their behalf in order to get their just dollars that are deserved in the African American community.
Last question for you. You talked about Earl being this big man. Physically, he was a big man.
Yes.
And I think for a lot of people, the lamb chops are also very intimidating to a lot of people. Seeing this former, I think it was a Green Beret. He was in Special Forces. Coming in, that voice and that presence.
Yes, indeed. You would never forget him. Very imposing, but I also think very warm and very engaging. And yes, he did lead with the lamb chops, which I loved. That was so distinctly him. And so these are the ways that you remember somebody. These are their characteristics. These are the things that are indelibly etched in your mind about him. The wonderful, wonderful man.
All right. Linda Johnson Rice, we certainly appreciate it. Thanks a lot. All right, folks. One of those young upstarts who looked at what Earl Graves did and wanted to follow in his footsteps is Keith Clinkscales. Keith, of course, was founded Vanguard Media, had owned Savoy Magazine, as well as Honey, Heart and Soul. Keith, I don't think people really, people who, they might have read Black Enterprise, but an Earl Graves Sr. really meant something to those of us who committed ourselves to work in black media because of all the barriers that they knocked down.
I mean, Earl, he represented so much. He was basically the person that helped to establish what black media should be about. He helped us get black executives. He helped us get black business. And more importantly, he taught us the importance of politics. You cannot make things work unless you put all these things together, and he created quite an amount of influence.
And we talk about that influence as somebody who stepped out there, worked at Vibe magazine, then launched his own company. Share just some of those conversations, advice you may have gotten. I mean, even though he was, look, you're a Kappa, I'm an Alpha, and he was in that other little fraternity, Omega Psi Phi. And with, as a matter of fact, and I got some photos. I can't find, they were not digital then, but I remember we were at some event, and there's a photo of him, this huge laugh from him, because we were joking about, of course, him being Omega and me being an Alpha.
Well, I think very early on, Mr. Graves was kind of like the chairman. He was like the Don of all this stuff. And when I was at Vibe, very early on, he spoke with me, and I was so excited to really meet him and get to know him. And then his son, Butch, sat me down and kind of talked to me about the way things are in black media, and I felt that that was important. And from that whole time, I've been able to kind of be a part of the Black Enterprise family, and most of that was led by Mr. Graves, making sure that I not only had opportunities to talk to Butch and what else was going on, but when other opportunities came forward, I was considered, and that was something that was important.
When you first of all, I've heard you say this now 3 times. You said Mr. Graves, and then of course you had John H. Johnson called Mr. Johnson. There's a level of respect that's been afforded to both of them because of their pioneering status in this space.
Well, yeah, not just because of their pioneering status. I mean, what they did, Roland. I mean, you know how hard advertising is. You know how hard it is to run one of these businesses, and you go back to 1970, as you so eloquently put, 2 years after King. A lot of things, the black advertising that we've had today exists because of Mr. Johnson and Mr. Graves. They were courageous. They would go sit in people's offices. They would explain the importance of this marketplace. So if we didn't have that, you wouldn't have anything today. I was fortunate to run Vibe, but by the time that happened, you're talking about almost 20-something years of Essence, of Black Enterprise, of 30 years of Ebony, and that helped to at least shape a marketplace. The thing that we have today where people understand the power of the black marketplace, it comes very early on from people like Mr. Graves, making sure not only to talk about just the market, but making sure people got the opportunity for jobs, for positions. That's how that happened.
And when you talk about creating folks in other different spaces, look, it was also validation of your business. If you were able to be in Black Enterprise, for those who are black journalists, the opportunities, whether to write for a BE, to write for an Ebony or Jet, to write for an Essence as well. And that's the thing I think people don't realize. Those magazines served as a springboard for so many other different spaces, and not just in terms of whether you're at a business or you're a journalist. I mean, look at the people who worked at PR firms, the people who worked in other ancillary businesses, this whole ecosystem that these magazines created.
Yeah, and Roland, the other thing is just how black people expanded to other media, into radio and into television, and having influence in different places where the major advertisers were not as afraid of them because they started to see the business in working with people of color. When you think about what has happened, especially if you had Ed Lewis on earlier, you look at how powerful Essence has made the black women's marketplace. A lot of that came from what Black Enterprise did in terms of speaking about markets, speaking about the opportunities for people, showing black CEOs, showing people like Ken Chenault. Where does Ken Chenault come from? Ray McGuire. You see some of these executives come along. Miss Hughes. When you see all these people, they come through those pages. They come through that opportunity. This is it's a sad day, but at the same time, it's the foundation of what we have, and that's something that his family and Mr. Graves' legacy can be extremely proud of.
All right, Keith Cleanskills, we surely appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Roland.
All right, folks, right now I want to play a video, actually, the Black Enterprise folks put together on their YouTube channel, saluting the founder of Black Enterprise, Earl Graves Sr. Here we go.
He's a visionary. He has the determination, the will to carry that vision through. And thank goodness for Earl Graves.
Earl G. Graves Sr. mapped out his vision for the first African-American magazine 40 years ago.
When my father started Black Enterprise, his vision was creating a publication that would provide how-to information for African Americans to be successful in business as entrepreneurs.
It's 1970. Money was tight for most African Americans. They were hungry for a way to build wealth and power. And Graves was ambitious and gutsy enough to deliver a way. The advertising world had never seen anyone like him.
First off, he had a very unique look, which is his sideburns. But he also was a dashing figure. And when I say that, you know, with every level of respect. He was well-dressed. His presentation was polished. He knew exactly what he wanted to say. And he was determined.
Married with 3 young sons, the 35-year-old former assistant to Senator Robert F. Kennedy and former Green Beret never took no for an answer, making the publication profitable by its 9th issue.
When my father went on sales calls, he went out with this unique sales toolkit. And so we'd open up his kit, and he'd get to his first card, and then he would take people through what is Black Enterprise about. I remember my father telling me a story in regards to how difficult it was for him to secure advertising. He went to go see a top advertising agency. One of the gentlemen looked at him and said, "Black people only drive used cars and drink half pints of liquor. Why would we want to advertise in Black Enterprise?" And he said it infuriated him, but he was cool about it. And he ultimately won the gentleman over and won the account over a period of time.
The fact that he's so authentic, I think that's why businesses listen to him. I think that's why the broader Black community listens to him, because everybody really respects what he says because they know he's really genuine about what he's saying.
His vision has become a multi-million-dollar media empire that now encompasses Black Enterprise Magazine, 2 award-winning television shows, a state-of-the-art website, iPad and mobile phone apps, world-class business conferences, and more. With a welcoming handshake, Graves has greeted policymakers from every arena, earning their respect as a trusted resource. Today, Black Enterprise is under the leadership of his son, CEO, Earl Butch Graves, Jr.
The most important lessons I learned from my father was that he never put his family second. Because in his mind, success without sharing it with his family would not be success at all.
Married 50 years to wife Barbara, with 3 sons and 8 grandchildren, Earl G. Graves Sr. still made time to hold seats on the boards of major corporations.
I think Earl Graves shares a common characteristic of our founder, Don Kendall. And Don Kendall believes that everyone in the company should be a salesperson, regardless of whether you're in finance or HR or marketing or whatever. And Earl Graves was a salesperson for PepsiCo every day. I think the reason we got our products into American Airlines was because of Earl Graves.
He's a long-standing civil rights activist. He holds 70 honorary degrees and is a committed champion of education.
It gives me great pride to announce a pledge of $1 million to my alma mater, Morgan State University.
His mission is to ensure that all Americans, including those of color, share in the American dream of equality and prosperity.
This man has taken risk on behalf of all of us and has achieved greatly. And I think for that, we're all achieving more for it. Congratulations.
All right, folks. And again, that was a video that was put together by the folks at Black Enterprise. You heard in that video Earl Graves Sr. talking about his alma mater, where he really got his business start at Morgan State University in Baltimore. Well, joining us right now is David Wilson. He is the president of Morgan State University. President Wilson, glad to have you on the show.
Roland, thank you for having me on this evening.
Earl was in that other fraternity. We know what the real one is. I'm just, but it's so interesting. He really loved Morgan State.
I'm sorry, but can you repeat that?
I said he really loved Morgan State University.
Oh, Earl Graves Sr. Was the epitome, if you will, of the Morgan graduate. He was the quintessential Morganite. He loved Morgan State, and Morgan State loved him back. I often say that in my 10 years as president at Morgan, and I have been in the company of Mr. Graves, numerous times. I can count on one hand when I've seen him, and he did not have orange and blue on. He had the orange and blue bow tie, the blue blazer, and even would wear orange and blue checkered slacks. I mean, he really loved Morgan.
Well,
and we loved him back. And as as I was making my way into the presidency at Morgan, I reached out to him as I was leaving Wisconsin. I'd never met him, and reached out to him in 2010, and we had a great conversation. And he said, I think we should have regular conversations because it was a transition period. And so he and I spoke several times before I actually showed up at Morgan. And he gave me some wonderful guidance and great wisdom in terms of how to make sure that Morgan was connected to the business community. And then he came to Morgan, and we had a personal conversation. And at the end of the personal conversation, he wrote me a check. And he said, look, I have contributed to my alma mater over the years. Of course, he gave us $1 million donation, and at the time, that was the largest in our history. But he said, take this check, Mr. President, and use it to go to business functions in and around Baltimore and Maryland and the region when I know as a state institution, you cannot use state money to do that. And I was so moved by the fact that he understood that as a university president, it was important for me to really have the ear of the business community. And so I certainly took advantage of that and began to go to functions, the Greater Baltimore Committee here in Baltimore, and to increase the Morgan presence. But I just really, really think very, very highly of Earl G. Graves Sr.
Well, he certainly did indeed love the university. It was interesting reading the backstory of how he really took advantage of homecoming at Morgan State by cutting deals with local florists and reselling those flowers on campus. And so he was focused on making money real early.
Yeah, real early. As a matter of fact, a few years ago, as we were about to open a $90 million building there at Morgan to house the Earl G. Graves School of Business and Management, Butch and the family invited me up to kind of go through many of the things that he had accumulated over the years. And so to see which of those things, of course, we wanted to bring and put on display in the building. So first of all, I was just overwhelmed with all of the honorary doctorates that he had received. But what shared with me was the original kit that he used as he was getting Black Enterprise magazine off the ground. And he would literally go door to door. He still had his briefcase and how he would go selling ads. And it was just incredible to see that he had this acumen for entrepreneurship early on. And he often told me that when he came to Morgan from Brooklyn, that he didn't really come to get the skills at Morgan to go and, quote unquote, work for somebody else, that he wanted to start his own business and to be his own boss. And immediately he started a grass cutting business and would tell me, yeah, I saved my little nickels and saved my little dimes and paid my way through Morgan in the process. So he was really destined for greatness and destined for success. And our current students at Morgan, former students, alums, we just adore Earl G. Graves Sr.
David Wilson, President, Morgan State University. I appreciate you joining us for this tribute to the life and legacy of Earl Graves Sr.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it, folks. In 2006, National Association of Black Journalists honored Earl Graves with their Lifetime Achievement Award. Here is that ceremony.
Year history. The mission of Black Enterprise has always been to promote financial empowerment, encourage the establishment of minority-owned businesses, and highlight their accomplishments. No doubt, since its founding in 1970, that mission has been and continues to be accomplished. The face and visionary behind that brand is none other than Earl G. Graves Sr. Taking a look back, Earl grew up in Brooklyn, New York. He went on to graduate from Morgan State University with a Bachelor of Arts in Economics. He then enlisted in the U.S. Army. After completing his enlistment as a captain in the Green Berets, he would serve as an administrative assistant to Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and here during the turbulent yet progressive time also known as the Civil Rights era, Earl's vision and passion began to take shape. He started developing his nationwide reputation in business by forming a management consulting firm to advise corporations and major multinational companies on urban affairs and economic development. And 2 years later, alongside the work of raising 3 little boys with his wife Barbara, Earl founded Black Enterprise. Detailing the impact of Black enterprise on the financial industry would be trying to explain the Bible's significance on religion. The magazine has a readership of nearly 4 million nationwide and a paid circulation of 500,000. By the end of this year, the magazine projects revenues will exceed $60 million. And that's before you even factor in its successful brand extensions from online features to golf tournaments to networking ski events. In a super competitive and rapidly changing magazine publishing industry, Earl has beat the odds and made Black Enterprise a model for business success. Now, earlier this year, Earl passed the torch of Chief Executive Officer and President to his son, Earl Butch Graves, Jr., marking a milestone for the family-owned media company. But Earl Sr. remains as chairman and publisher. Now, it's certainly not a first night Earl has received a nod. He's gotten honorary degrees from over 60 colleges and universities. He received the NAACP's 1999 Spring Garden Medal, the civil rights organization's highest achievement award for African Americans. Last year, NABJ recognized Black Enterprise for marking its 35th anniversary. This year, NABJ salutes the man who has had his finger on the pulse of the world of business for the last 36 years and has never let it go. For these reasons and more, NABJ is proud to present the 2006 Lifetime Achievement Award to Earl G. Graves, Sr.
Good evening. I first want to thank Brian Gumbel. I don't mean Brian Gumbel for that introduction. Al Roker, right. We get even with each other almost every time we're on the stage. Thank you. Good evening. My sincere thanks to all of you for that warm reception. And thanks also to the leadership of the National Association of Black Journalists for bestowing upon me this award for lifetime achievement. I know that it helps to be 105 to be honored for one's life achievements, so I'm flattered that the NABJ has chosen to recognize me while I'm still young. I do need to share a short story. They gave me 3 minutes, but I figured 3.5, and it's okay. This morning I was working out in the health club in the hotel, and there was a young man working out, and he was lifting weights and huffing and puffing, and I was glad when he left because it was depressing to see what he was doing and I was not. And then in comes another young man, and he looks up and he goes, "Wow, Mr. Graves." I said, "How are you?" As I was on the machine doing the best that I could, running, and he said to me, "Wow, I never thought." I said, "Okay, fine." And then he said, "How old are you?" So I said, 71. He said, "Wow, why are you working out?" So I said to him, "Let me guess, you're on the hospitality committee of the organization, right?" Anyway, true, absolutely true story. Seriously, what this award tells me is that somewhere along the way, I was able to make a contribution. And the fact that I've been included in such a distinguished company tells me that my contribution has mattered. Two of the great pioneers of African-American journalism were John B. Russwurm and Samuel E. Cornish, co-editors of Freedom's Journal, the first African-American owned and printed newspaper in the United States. In the journal's very first issue, published in 1827, Russwurm and Cornish printed these words: "We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoke for us." These words rang true just as for me when I founded Black Enterprise magazine 36 years ago. My dream was a publication that represented, empowered, and spoke the truth about America's black business and professional class. To a degree, I think we've succeeded, and if I have, then many of the people who are here tonight representing Black Enterprise are part of that, and I'd like to ask them to stand. Alfred Edmond is leading the charge. Where are the Black Enterprise people? I told you guys to get your registration in early. You'd be up closer. That's what happens, right? Okay. To a degree, I think I've succeeded because of the young people represented here, just as a whole generation of African-American publishers, reporters, and editorialists succeeded in bringing a measure of true dignity to the African-American story. And yet I fear that those words published by Rushworm and Cornish so long ago still ring true today, louder than ever. The nightmare of Katrina and its aftermath, the ongoing tragedy of the war in Iraq, the scourge of AIDS and the silent response within our community, the collapse of public education, the crisis of the African-American male. These and other issues are destroying the hopes and aspirations of a whole generation of our people. And with rare exception, I don't see the mainstream media asking why to the extent they should. I don't see elected officials being pressed hard for accountability. And I don't see enough stories that illuminate our experience in ways that are truthful, that inspire social change. That's why the efforts of the esteemed members of this association cannot go unrecognized. You shine the spotlight on the issues that we as a people are facing, both in the black media and the mainstream. Clearly, the moral imperative that drove our first African-American journalists is just as strong today as it was for today's generation. That didn't quite come out the way it was supposed to, but it's all right. My message, particularly for the young men and women here this evening, is to continue the legacy of social justice embodied by those who came before you. Use your voice, your talent, and your influence to plead our cause. Because if you don't, the question is, who will? Thanks again for this award. I pledge to continue to you to strive to be the very best.
That was Earl Graves Sr. Getting the NABJ Lifetime Achievement Award in 2006. I had the pleasure, of course, in my career as a journalist to meet Earl Graves Sr., to meet John H. Johnson, Ed Lewis as well. We've now lost Graves and Johnson, two of our pioneers. The bottom line is here. If you dedicate your life to be in black media, you can't help but bow down to those figures, the work that they have done, the work that they did to advance black business along the sides of course, Robert Abbott, who founded the Chicago Defender, A.I. Scott, who founded the Atlanta Daily World, and, of course, the folks who founded the Pittsburgh Courier, Frederick Douglass, and the North Star, and goes on and on and on. The reality is that we needed Black Enterprise in 1970. We need Black Enterprise in 2020. We need this show. We need others as well. Folks, I keep saying this repeatedly. We are now 23 years away from this nation being a nation majority of people of color. And we showed you the video earlier of all the black experts that we've had on this show talking about coronavirus over the last 3 weeks. More than 50 folks discussing it. The reality is now that we're seeing the racial disparity numbers, someone tweeted this to me, that Dr. Fauci and others at the White House are now commenting on the racial disparities and the underlying reasons. Why is that important? Because they just did it today. Mainstream media just started talking about those numbers in the last 24 hours. We've been talking about those numbers for the past month. If you don't understand why black media is important, then you better understand this, and that is, without black media, our stories are not centered. Our stories are not top of the line. They come behind everyone else. And so we certainly thank Earl Graves Sr., may he rest in peace, for what he contributed to African Americans, to black business, but simply to America, because without black enterprise, you would not have the stories that were being focused and profiled. You would not have African Americans rising in corporate America. The role that they play to force corporate America to promote African Americans the same way you had Sam Lacey and others who promoted Jackie Robinson, exact same thing. We understand all of these things are linked. And so we certainly appreciate his life and legacy, which is why we wanted to do this tribute. He wouldn't get the accolades properly in mainstream media, but that's why we exist here at Roland Martin Unfiltered. Please support what we do. We're averaging 10 million views a month. We're, of course, growing in our YouTube channel, nearly 500,000. Of course, we live stream across all 3 platforms, YouTube, Facebook, and Periscope. But your dollars make it possible, so please join our Bring the Funk fan club. You can, of course, hit us up on the Cash App, $RM Unfiltered. You can hit us on PayPal. Go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com and go to our Square account. Of course, we're sitting here greatly impacted by this coronavirus, has an impact on us and our advertising dollars. So your dollars are going to make it possible for us to deliver you this kind of content every single day, which is why we are here. Thanks a bunch. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Holla! You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.